you see how I'm built, right? He said, okay, you know, that's great. I've seen you. He was the JV coach. If that doesn't work out, you know, what are your other interests? I'm going to be a Major League Baseball player. And he's like, he was so nice. He said, Brett, you know, let's think about this. You know, anything else that you've thought about that you can, maybe that you have an interest in? I go, you know, an airline pilot. That seems interesting to me. And here's how I'm going to embellish the story, but this is the best way I can remember it. He said, well, I'm looking at your science scores. Is there something else that you might find of interest? So, and then when I got to senior, I had to get a tutor to get through science and graduate. Everything else, I had good grades. If I'd have had ingots, that wouldn't have been a challenge for me. We know that your teachers are struggling with ingots. What we try to do is make their experience easier, which makes it easier for you as a principal or administrator. And this factoid, how many of you can read it? Transition to that. Can you see? Okay. The first one that raises their hand that can answer this question, that when I researched it, I was shocked at what I found. So 48, this is 14 months before COVID, okay? 48 states reported a shortage of its math teachers, okay? Teachers in 43 states reported a shortage of science teachers. The most popular teacher certification in Florida, according to report, is elementary ed, which makes up just over 22% of all certifications for the current school year. By contrast, let's see how many of you are good at math. That's the percentage I want to know. But here's who's the first to let me know? What is the percentage? 1.5, okay? Where's the clicker? So if you'll come by our booth, 1.5. Drop by our booth, and I'll get you information for a gift card. Now, the stats that I gave you for over the country, this is for state of Florida. You're number one as far as science, hiring math teachers. That's why I want you, if you can, come by our booth. I'd love to have a dialogue with you about how I want to know what your challenges are. And we can move from there if you have an interest. This is a quote from one of our principals. How far is St. Johns County from here, by the way? If you can't tell, I'm from North Carolina. Okay. Ask yourself these questions. Why ingots? Why take the time and come by and see us? Who in here was or still is a coach? Okay, I've been in education for almost 30 years. It's because of a coach. The influence that you have, you can't put a price tag on the aha moments that you have. I can't tell you the impact he had as an 11th, 12th grader. One, he let me know I wasn't going to be a baseball player in the major leagues, but he was the reason I got into education. So thank you. I'll turn it over to my friend recently. Let me know if I ever misquoted anything about science. She was the director of the state of science. So.
No, you did great. I think I just put it on my desktop. Yay. I don't know where my clicker went. There's my clicker. Good morning. My name's PJ Duncan, and I am the STEAM director at the Florida Department of Education in the Bureau of Standards and Instructional Support. Kathy Nobles is my boss. She is not able to be here today, so I'm going to be flying solo. And we're going to talk about the new B.E.S.T standards. So these learning outcomes are a little repetitive because we're going to go through ELA, talk about ELA, and then transition to math and talk about math, and wind up with talking about professional development opportunities that are happening this summer for your district leaders and teachers. So I am sure that most of you are familiar with the executive order that was issued in January of 2019 that let us know that we were going to review ELA and math. I led the math portion of the review, and I had a colleague that led the ELA portion. So I'm familiar with what's happened for ELA and math through the last 2.5 years. So I can give you some background on the ELA, and I can give you a lot deeper information about math. So this is what we've been doing. In 2019 and to 20, between January of 2019 and February of 2020, we conducted the standards review. And this past year, in 2020 and up to now, we have been getting ready for instructional support and for the professional development that's going to be happening this summer. And then 2021 now and beyond, we're going to still be focusing on professional development and implementation. So this is the timeline. Most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the fact that in 21-22 school year, K2 ELA will be implemented, and then beginning in 22-23, we'll have 312 for ELA implemented and all of K-12 mathematics. There could be another box over there that said 23-24 for the new civics standards and benchmarks. I see some folks making a picture, so I just didn't want to change it too quick. So we want to talk about systems because we are taking a much different approach with this standards implementation this time. And what I mean by that is we are being very strategic and deliberate. We've been working with R7CC, which is the Region 7 Comprehensive Center, and NERN out of the University of North Carolina to really focus on implementation. And we have a system that we're developing for this implementation, which involves you guys. So that's what I want to focus on today, is how you can engage in the system as we move to these new benchmarks. So this was a great introduction to implementation science. When we worked with NERN, this was kind of what we started off with. We meet with them. I'm on a team that meets with them every Friday, and we work towards implementation together, myself with leadership. And this is kind of, I don't know if you can see it, but we've got a problem on the left, and then the problem solved on the right, and in the middle it says, then a miracle occurs. And he says, I think you should be more explicit here in step 2. So that's kind of where we all of the people that are involved in this implementation were involved when we went to new standards back in 2010 and then again in 2014. And we've really, really focused on learning from the lessons of the past and being more strategic and deliberate this time. Because last time I was in a school district teaching math and science, and I know that a miracle occurring was kind of how it was presented to me. I had a faculty meeting. I was teaching 7th grade at the time, and my administrator said, we're going to new standards. You're going to be really happy. There are a lot less for you to teach now. And that was kind of it. So I did go to the big rollouts for the state, but I went one time. I never saw those people again, and I was on my own. We're trying to remedy that by not only being more involved at the state level, but continuing to build relationships. So this is a very popular slide. Kathy loves this slide because it usually gets a big laugh because we talk about commitment versus compliance because we're looking for commitment. So in this slide with the bacon and eggs, the chicken was compliant, but the pig was committed. But I live on a farm in North Florida, so I have chickens and pigs, and I know that that's the real deal. There's no coming back from the bacon stage. And we're looking for that. We're looking for commitment, relationship building, and partnerships throughout the state as we work towards this new implementation. So this is very important for everybody to know because this is no joke, and lots of people think it might be. Actual Florida educators wrote these standards and benchmarks along with our team. And we learned from the lessons of the past. One of my favorite stories to tell is we had college math teachers on our writing teams. And we were having this long discussion about 9-12 math, and the leaders that were there for the districts that were talking about, well, we've got to include this in algebra. We have to include this because they need this when they get to college. And this very nice college teacher said, no, they don't. I teach college algebra, and no, they don't. They don't need that. These kind of powerful conversations led us to expectations that really match the needs. And you can't, and that was the case for ELA and for math. So we're going to focus on ELA first, but let me tell you, right now, we're at the level of working on solid Tier 1 instruction for ELA and for math. Now, we have in this next phase, in this next coming school year, in this next round of work, we are going to be engaging with our partners to work on some Tier 2 and Tier 3 interventions. So those are coming. Access points are being adopted in the July board meeting, state board meeting. So everything is rolling out, but as where we're at right now is we have been focused on Tier 1. So we have, this is the ELA slide, I love it. There's like, stop. We have some things that we're not doing anymore. And these are really important, and they're math and ELA. The first one is we're not unpacking standards anymore because we don't need to. I was meeting with a group of colleagues at the department, and we were presenting to them on the new standards and benchmarks. And they were in another bureau that supports instruction, and it blew their mind. So we went into a breakout room, and I was assigned to this particular breakout room, and one of the directors there said, so I think I know what we need to do. We need to take these benchmarks and put them together and then unpack them. And I said, well, we on purpose, wrote these to not have to be unpacked anymore. And here's the reason why. It's very important. Like, I remember The first time I went to a professional development and we were going to unpack standards, and my colleagues in that professional development were so not happy about that. But now, after a decade of doing that, that is our go-to thing. Let's unpack them. Well, when we did the standards review, we noticed some very important pieces of information that I'm sure you guys will agree with because you've probably lived it too. So if I'm a teacher in the classroom and I unpack the standards and I come to my common understanding, or I unpack them maybe with my district, I have my understanding. And then the instructional materials folks that write the textbooks, they unpack them and they have their own understanding. And then the assessment people, they unpack them and they have their own understanding. And now we don't have alignment. When you give people something and ask them to interpret it, there's too much variation in that interpretation. So in the very beginning, when we sat in a room and said, oh my goodness, we're going to have to review these standards, what do we do? And trust me, you can't Google that kind of stuff. I did try. I wanted to see if anybody had written anything about their experience, and there was nothing. I was starting from scratch. So we just sat down and we said, what makes us successful? And this is one of the things that came up. We need to be clear and concise because we don't need all this ambiguity anymore. It's not fair to the children, right? And it's not fair to the teachers that are working so hard, to the administrators that are supporting them. It's just not fair. So no more unpacking. So if you hear that in your schools or your district, you should stop and say, there's no need for that anymore, and here's why. And we don't want people interpreting them anymore just for the same reason. We have been very involved. Our team wrote the specifications for the publishers, and we trained the publishers on these standards. We work every week, several hours a week, with the assessment folks, going over every single assessment item and talking it through for alignment. So if unpacking is happening in the district, we lose all of that alignment, right? So it's important. And I believe, I could be wrong, often I am, but I believe you can't get behind these things like no more unpacking unless you understand the why. Right? Once you understand the why, and we skip the why sometimes, just because we're disseminating information to a large, broad audience. So, we would like to ask you to be that voice for us to explain why. We're not doing the shifts anymore. The reason for that is because the shifts are actually embedded within the standards and the benchmarks. So there's no need for the discussion around the shifts, because as you learn more about the benchmarks, you're going to say, oh, wait, I see this right here. They're embedded. There's no DOK levels in the new standards. And the reason for that is because we want all standards and benchmarks taught to all levels. Now, you will see DOK levels in assessment because item writers need that, but we should be instructing at all levels for all benchmarks. And there's no crosswalk. Now, this is a big one. People get mad at me all the time. I'll tell you a story. I'm a big storyteller, but I think it helps you understand why. We were working 12-hour days in December of 2019. Myself and my little team, we worked through Christmas, New Year's, morning to night because we had to get these finished. It was a labor of love. We were a little bit exhausted, but we were super happy because we saw what was happening, right? So one day I'm we had a common area, and a lot of times at Christmas people are gone. So we went out and sat in the common area because it was a bigger space and we were tired of this small little room we've been working in. And Vince Vergis, who's over assessment at the department, walked in and he said, PJ, when are you going to have a crosswalk for us to use in assessment? And I just looked over my shoulder and said, never. And he said, oh, okay. That meant that assessment had a lot of work to do. But here we were working 12-hour days. We were like, oh, we'll work alongside of you. But there is no crosswalk. There is none. You can try. People have. And I have seen some of them. And I am not saying that it's bad work. I'm just saying that if a teacher saw that crosswalk, I think they would be so confused and so lost. I think that they would be very frustrated. But there is good news coming that you don't need one. We've got other stuff. So these are the new things in the ELA benchmarks. Now we have stackable benchmarks. We have ELA expectations. Those ELA expectations we're going to dive deeper into in a minute. They're in all courses now, not just ELA. We have a book list. We have a civics book list. And we have a comprehensive glossary. I'll tell you about the glossary. We have a glossary in both math and ELA. We are not saying that that's the only way to define those terms, but we needed to say at a state level what some of these things were. I have never had so many emails as I have had in the last few years of my life about defining a trapezoid. Goodness gracious. We never would define a trapezoid. We've defined a trapezoid now. We took a stand and said, this is what it is. Where does it become important? It becomes important in assessment items. Because if we don't have a definition, teachers are not clear about how to prepare their students. It goes back to the clear and concise, removing these vague things that are open to interpretation. So, another thing that we learned on our standards tour. So in October of 2019, the math team and the ELA team got in a van and we went for 3 weeks. We went to 3 stops a week and did a standards listening tour. I was the van driver. And we drove around the state. And every time we got to a stop, the chancellor, sometimes the commissioner, the deputy chancellor, they would all be up and listen as people gave public comment. And then at the end, they would say, well, we thank you so much for being here. Team, please stand. And we would stand up and they'd say, if you have any questions, ask them. And then they would go out the other door. And so there I was, but we learned so much. So the next day, driving to the next stop, we would talk, right? And so this came out of one of those conversations. As a matter of fact, in some spots that we went to, we got like crucified. And the next day, you know what we did? We went to their district office and said, everybody that's upset with us, can we meet with you tomorrow? And we went and we sat down with them and we listened, which took a lot of the anger out of the process, to say, hey, well, first of all, how would you like a part-time job working for the Department of Education? We picked up a lot of our team members on that tour, right? Because they had good things to say. Well, one of the things that came out of that was, what is a benchmark? So I was at one of the stops, and there was a very emotional young lady that came up to the podium, and you could tell she was scared to death. Turns out she was a kindergarten teacher, and she had to talk at that. She cried through the entire time that she was talking to the chancellor and all the fancy people up on the stage. And she said, you can't have these benchmarks. I just can't do it. I can't do them. You just can't do this. And that's all she would say. So again, at the end, when the chancellor said, hey, if you got any questions, see her, bye. She came straight to me and she was still nervous. And I said, what's wrong? And she said, I can't do this. I said, what can't you do? Can you be specific? She said, I can't teach my students to count backwards from 20. And I said, I've never taught kindergarten, but I have 3 grown children. And I think you can do that. And she said, no, I can't. And I said, well, why? And she said, well, I can only teach a benchmark per week. She thought in her mind that she was going to have to teach those kids how to count backwards from 20 in a week. Now, it doesn't matter that that was not the expectation. It was her perception. It was her expectation. So we did something about it. We said, we have to define what a benchmark is. The next day in the van, she made such an impact on me. I said, we're defining a benchmark in this document because we have to. That's not fair. So we say benchmarks are for mastery by the end of the school year. Now, I'm going to be quite open and honest that somebody from the Department of Education had told that young lady she could only teach a benchmark a week. So what did I do? I called up and I said, we need to talk, we need to train you, we need to partner. You guys need to be on the same page with us. And I'm happy to say from that day on, they've been an active partner in this work to learn, so they don't say anything anymore that's counter to what we're doing. And that kind of shows you where your place is in this, because we're getting everybody on the same path so that our teachers don't end up crying because they can't. You know, she was crying because she loved her students and she wanted to do a good job. And I can work with that all day long. So we have changed the coding scheme to match the other content areas. So back in the day when we had the Sunshine State standards, all of the standards were coded the same. And then when we went to Common Core, we changed ELA and math. We changed them back. How confusing is that? So I was teaching middle grades, math, science, history, and reading. So back in like 2010 to 2012, and then I went to high school and just focused on high school science. But how confusing is that for a teacher to sit down and say, well, when I teach social studies, it's this way. When I teach math, it's this way. So one of the very first things we did was change the coding scheme to be like the other content areas to cut down on that confusion. So in the ELA and the math, we are mirroring the language of the other content areas. So we have strands, standards, and benchmarks. So ELA has 4 strands: foundations, reading, communication, and vocabulary, and they're color-coded in the ELA document. So these colors do matter, and we also color-coded math, and you'll see in a minute why that's important. So there are some underlying premises of the ELA standards that we can touch on really quickly, and there's a little bit more of this as we go through the remainder of the ELA slides. And I believe you get this presentation, but if you don't, you can always email me and I'll send it to you. My contact information's at the end. I will give you whatever you need. Again, we have, so what had happened in the transition to Common Core is the content of ELA kind of got set aside, and these new benchmarks bring back the content to the ELA classroom. There was a big back and forth about ELA has content. It's not just about the other content areas and ELA supporting those anymore. Again, clear and concise. We're focusing on, these book lists. To the best of our knowledge, we're the first state to have a book list for civics, as well as a book list for ELA. And I can tell you I was there as those books were selected, and as that was a long and and hard and difficult process with lots of feedback from lots of stakeholders because they wanted to get it right. And again, we're going to be, in both cases, we are going to be combining these benchmarks in a purposeful way, ELA and math. Now, you're going to see that we've tried to mirror everything, and there's only one thing that we couldn't work out, and we're about to get to it. So this also came on the listening tour. Driving down the road and we're talking about, we used to have remarks and examples. So people got confused because we had remarks and examples, and then they also saw clarifications, content limits. We had all these different words for the same thing. So we have benchmark clarifications to clarify the benchmark instructionally. So one of the things, again, on the listening tour, one morning down in the hotel lobby, all of us were sitting around having the free complimentary breakfast, and the chancellor said, I don't want anything about instruction in a benchmark. I just want it to be the expectation. If you want to put anything instructional in there, it better not be in the benchmark. The birth of the clarifications from that conversation. It took us a while to get there. Now, what you need to know is these clarifications hold just as much weight as the benchmarks. The state board adopted the entire package with equal weight. So if your teachers ask, well, what's more important here? Everything's important. They adopted the definition of a benchmark. We on purpose adopted. In the past, it hasn't been that way. We adopted standards, and then we had remarks and examples. And so the teachers would say, are these important? And we could say, well, they should inform your instruction. But now, where is that important? Where is it really important to say the clarifications matter? And they're equal to the benchmarks with assessment. Because assessment has to use those clarifications. In the past, assessment was clarifying our standards. And what does that create? A system where you're teaching and everything's based on the assessment. Now the assessment is following our lead. We switched it, which has been very powerful. And I think going to be super cool in the classroom because they have to use these clarifications when they're writing assessment items. And in those long 3-4 hour meetings that we do a couple times a week, we get so far in the weeds on this, and we hold our line. We do not give up. We say, no, it does not within the clarifications. You can't have that item. Amazing, the turn there. Our message is no more is assessment driving instruction in the state of Florida. The standards and the benchmarks are, and the assessment's following us. And it has been a challenge. Well, it is exciting. I'll tell you that it's going to come down to you guys helping us with that, though, because we've got to re-envision instruction. No more test item specifications. No more. And I'm going to tell you, I've got something better than the test item specifications for you. Way better. I'm not just going to say, don't use that and then not have something for you to use. I got something better for you to use than the test item specifications. And you're going to see in just a minute. So here's an example of a 7th grade benchmark, and you can see that the benchmark is clear and concise. Where we get into instruction is in the clarifications, and again, it's very powerful for assessment and for instructional materials writers to have these clarifications. And I can tell you that, through our trainings that we've done with the publishers, we have done countless calls with them to be able to answer all their questions. The clarifications are very helpful to them. Now, this is interesting, and we have something similar to this in mathematics, but we're just going to, in the interest of time, talk about ELA. So we have these elementary foundational standards based upon the science of reading. But this is what's super cool to me. I mean, that's super cool. But we have something even better, new. We have this. So I was an intensive reading teacher for 11th graders. Intensive reading for 11th graders. Like, let that permeate in your brain for a minute. What do you do, right? So we were in meetings, and of course, I'm leading the math, but I have my reading endorsement. I've lived the other side of the aisle teaching. I've taught reading. I've taught ELA in middle grades and intensive reading in high school to 11th graders. And I said, there was nothing for me to use. Nothing. And people in Common Core, there was this philosophy that you only built these foundational skills in the lower grades, and if they didn't read in the secondary grades, you're basically on your own. No more. We not only have the standards and benchmarks to build that foundational knowledge that we all know kids get to high school without. It could, generally, in my case, like, I could look back on the kids I had in 11th grade, and I did, and they were chronically absent in early grades. So now they're here in high school. What are we going to do? Just let them graduate without reading? No, we're going to do something about it. And now we have stuff to do with it. Now teachers will have actual standards and benchmarks written. And this is the other thing, not written for an elementary school child, written for a high school child specifically that cannot read in high school. Game changer, at least for me. And again, just going back, that we know that in early grades, we have to build these skills so that we know we're reducing. It's just like fluency in math. You're reducing the cognitive demand on a child when they can read and they can figure out how to decode a word. They're not using all their brain power on that. They can think about other things. Same thing with knowing your facts in math. You're reducing that cognitive demand. And we have appendices in both math and ELA. And we have these ELA expectations. I recently met with a group of science leaders, and they were freaking out about the ELA expectations and the mathematical thinking and reasoning benchmarks being in their courses beginning in 22-23. I said, why would you freak out? We're doing this already. You know, the content area literacy standards are gone. And now we have these. Like, in any good science classroom, cite evidence and to explain and justify reasoning. I certainly hope that's going on in a science classroom. The content area literacy standards, we went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and it was like fitting a square peg in a round hole. We were working with social studies teacher leaders, working with science teacher leaders, and we just simply could not make it work. This worked. ELA expectations are in all courses, math courses too, beginning in 22-23. Now, this is where the difference lies. And I promise you, if we could have made this work, we would have. ELA has spotlight benchmarks. We don't have those. Spotlight benchmarks and stackable benchmarks, meaning that you're going to have a focus, like your main player that's in the spotlight here in the middle, and the supporting actors are the other benchmarks. Suffice it to say, for now, in ELA and mathematics, there should be no teaching of benchmarks in isolation. They're meant to be put together. In math, we could not make stacking work because math doesn't stack like ELA does. We tried again. It just wouldn't work. We have connecting benchmarks in mathematics. And we have a benchmark of focus. Now, literacy directors are dispersed around the state. So this is really hard to read, but again, you'll have access to this presentation. And you can email me if you can't find it somehow. You can email me, I'll send it right to you. And these folks can help you. That's what their job is to help with this implementation. Now, these are the professional development opportunities this summer are upcoming for ELA. Next week is the Summer Literacy Institute. And then there will be a fall regional literacy. Okay, in the spring we had regional literacy institutes. The summer we're having one statewide literacy institute. In the fall we'll go back to the regional. And those people here, they go to their appropriate regions so they can meet you, work with you. You know who they are. When you go back to your school in your district, you know these people. So like if you're in the north, you would have 1, 2, 3, and 4 up in the Panhandle, had a regional literacy institute in April. I was there. And 1, 2, 3, and 4 regional directors were there too, presenting, working with the leaders. And all of this is going back to our very strategic and deliberate implementation science-based plan for implementation. If you need to get in touch with Carrie, Carrie's contact information is here. Carrie Sweet, Deputy Director, Just Read, Florida. Carrie's over in St. Pete today at item review for ELA with assessment. And I have a couple of team members over there as well for math and science. Or we would have a bigger presence here today. You're just stuck with me. All right, so again, we're to math. Again, promise you this. Lots of people thought this was false. They would print stories in the news and I would read it and it'd say, sure, Florida is working with teachers. And I would be like, yeah, sure, we are. But, you know, now I think everybody knows that. So we have geographically all over the state, we're represented. You guys are represented. Again, common coding, so that's the old at the top. We had domains, clusters, standards. The clusters went back to that, the shifts where we said some benchmarks, some standards were more important than others. That was so confusing for everybody. Assessment, for instructional materials, writers, everybody, teachers. Okay, so this is going to be repetitive. No unpacking. I hope you see a theme that we tried to make this very repetitive so that you don't have to remember what's for ELA and what's for math. The only thing that's going to be different is that whole spotlight benchmark, and we have a benchmark of focus. We're connecting, they're stacking. Literally everything else, we fell in line with one another. They're going to be connected. They're going to be taught to all DOK levels. They're going to build mastery of the benchmark, including the clarifications when planning for instruction. So you can tell your teachers the expectations in the benchmark, the clarifications are for them for instruction. And I've got something else for them too. No crosswalk. I mean, I've seen one, and I can't imagine how much time it took the person that made that to do it. And any teacher that sat down with that, I can only imagine what they would think. They don't need to do that. I've got other things for them. So I think we talked about this enough, but let me show you. On the right is a current standard, and on the left are the benchmarks that came out of that old standard. Now look, we're not only in the algebraic reasoning strand on the left, we're in the geometric reasoning. Here's where this whole crosswalk becomes like this convoluted spider web of arrows, and I mean, I can't imagine, but there's no need for that. I have something that will take care of things for educators. There's no need for a crosswalk. This is the progression of strands now in K-12 math. Before, it was like jumping from one strand to another strand, then to a third strand. And when you try to do that progression, it was like mind-numbing. If you've ever seen the progression of our current maths, it looks like a spider web of a spider that went just totally crazy. I mean, there's arrows everywhere. We said that's not fair to teachers, and that's not fair to parents. Like, we're going to ask them to jump from one domain to another. So we cleaned it up. The color coding matters. Now, if I could go back in time, there's two things on here I would do differently. You'll see number sense and operations goes all the way through K-12, and fractions are between grade 1 and grade 5. Misconception that has created is that fractions are only in grades 1 through 5. When you use fractions throughout grades 1 through 12, when we started getting those questions, I was like, oh gosh, if I could only go back in time. It's set now. And the other one, if I could go back in time, financial literacy in 9-12, it's really in K-12. There's a financial and data literacy course in 9-12, which is, I think, going to be a game changer. If you have negative feelings towards consumer math, like I did, because I'm older and was around when we used consumer math just to sort of get some kids through high school, and it wasn't very rigorous and it wasn't very challenging. We have this new mathematics for financial and data literacy that is going to knock your socks off. Like, our kids are going to leave knowing how to be an adult, knowing how to do their taxes, knowing how to manage their money, knowing how to invest, knowing how to not get ripped off when they buy a car or take out a credit card. Data literacy. They're going to know how to watch the news and say, that's not right. How about that? Because like, I saw something last week on the news and they said we'd had 100% increase in something. I can't remember what it was. And the number went from 3 to 6 out of like 1,000. But it sounds like, whoa, 100% increase. That must be really bad. But when we went to 3 to 6 out of 1,000, it's not so bad. So we're going to teach them how to be critical thinkers and take the data that they see in the news, on TV, in print, on social media, wherever, and make sense of it and say, that's good. I don't know if that one is really telling me all I need to know. You should check it out. It's a fantastic course. We've got a lot of other states calling us and asking us right now. We have 20 other states calling us and asking us about these standards and benchmarks and about that course. And you know who wrote it? Florida math teacher experts. Promise. Lots and lots of work. And they did all that for free, y'all. All that for free. Labor of love. So I'm good. I'm on time. So this is a little kind of a way to describe what we're talking about with the connecting of benchmarks as far as instructional design. So currently we take a standard and we look at the content, and then we go to the instructional part of it. And now we're saying, nope. First of all, you're going to hear a lot of your teachers saying, we've reset mathematics instruction in the state of Florida, and that is not just something to say. That is something that's the real deal. And again, I've got things to help you so that you don't have to figure out all of this on your own. So I know my students. And I connect these benchmarks to make them successful. Let me give you an example from science. I was teaching biology, and I had students who were those students that, they're in high school. They haven't really, a lot of them were in my intensive reading for 11th graders, and they were in biology in 11th grade. And they had been chronically absent, and they were currently chronically absent too. And I was going to try to, get them through biology. And I had this one particular class, and I was teaching them one day about genetics. And it was like a light bulb like a flurry of engagement went across my classroom. Everything I taught for the remainder of the year had something to do with genetics. I connected every bit of the content back to genetics because they loved it. They just absolutely loved it. That's what we're talking about. Know your kids, know what they need, and then bring what they need to them. So we had another problem in the state of Florida. We were assessing and teaching particular strategies that kids didn't necessarily like or want to do. That's just the facts of the matter. If a child wants to multiply like their parents taught them to multiply at home, we're not going to tell them anymore that they can't do that. We want them to use whatever strategy works for them. Let me tell you, before all this started, I spent a lot of time in classrooms. And so I was in a classroom, and it was elementary. And I remember they were in chapter 6, section 2 of their book, and they were learning about a strategy. It was the area model. And I was walking around, and kids were at their desks doing the problems and getting the problems. They were correct. Their answers were correct. And the teacher was going around and saying, no, that's not right. I mean, when we're living in a world where we're telling kids that the best way that they can grow up and get a job is in STEM, we need them to feel confident in math. And telling them that they have the correct answer, but they've done it wrong, so they get the problem wrong, is not helping with that, right? So that's gone. That's gone. Now we're going to teach the strategies. Where did those strategies come from? They came from kids. We have explore benchmarks now in K-8 that allow kids to explore mathematics. And are we going to assess those? No, we are not. Because we don't want to say there's a right way to explore something. What in the world, right? Creativity. There's no telling what strategies we can generate out of our classrooms when we let them do it how they want to. And I got phone call after phone call after phone call. It was usually grandparents that said, I'm so mad that I can't help my grandchild with their math homework. And since about a year and a half ago, I've said, sir, ma'am, help's coming. Just give me a little bit more time. Soon you will be able to help your child. And when they solve a problem right and they get the right answer on an assessment in the state of Florida, it will not be marked wrong because they didn't do it in a certain way anymore. Okay, so we want them to be able to solve a problem and provide any equivalent solution they want to. No more of it has to be an improper fraction. It has to be a mixed number. It has to be reduced to its simplest terms. It has to be this. That is not the way math works in the real world. And how do I know that? Because I've worked with mathematicians and they think that's, frankly, their words, not mine, ridiculous. They don't do that in math world. They don't say, oh, wait, let me reduce this fraction before I work ahead. It's just not the way it works. We want to create mathematicians, so we're trying to model after what mathematicians really do. So simplified fractions are not necessary in order to determine mastery of a benchmark in elementary anymore. In secondary, they don't have to rationalize the denominator anymore, which is like, again, it is because mathematicians, they don't do that stuff. So why are we doing it to our students? If they can get an answer and they give me 6/8, fine. 3/4, fine. Yes. And it was a fight, it's a battle because change is hard. People don't like change. There's great people working on the assessments, don't get me wrong. But when you change everything about what we're doing, they were like, oh no, this is going to be a lot of work. I said, it is. So we've got, again, repetitive, clear and concise language. They're written to allow the individual student's skills to matter. Written to allow student flexibility in solving the problems the way that they need to. We've got explore benchmarks that allow them to discover mathematics before we tell them how to do it. Predominantly the explore benchmarks, I don't want to say absolutely because so all of this explore is around the operations and numeracy skills in math for K-8. And there's a whole fluency continuum. The students are going to explore, and then they're going to work to procedural reliability, and then they're going to work to fluency with automaticity embedded throughout that continuum. We're going to have multiple pathways for students to be successful. And there's an intentional balance of conceptual understanding and procedural fluency. I got slaughtered on the listening tour. People said, you're getting rid of all the conceptual understanding. All you're going to do is memorize. I said, no. But once people think that or they hear that, then it's their perception. You got to try to give them the information so they don't have that understanding anymore. I totally understand that, So the MTRs, mathematical thinking and reasoning standards, are like the EEs. They're going to be in all K-12 courses. They're in the ELA courses. No, they're not. That's the only thing they're not in. They're not in the ELA courses, but the EEs are in the math courses. So I could spend a whole bunch of time on the mathematical thinking and reasoning, but we don't have that kind of time today. I'm just going to tell you that the mathematical practices that we have in our current courses were the foundation of building these MTRs. And the most beautiful thing in the MTRs to me is there's a standard and then there's some bullet points. The bullet points are for the students to self-assess about what they're experiencing in math instruction. And then there's clarifications for the teachers. So there's 7. Again, when we had the conversation with the science folks, they were really upset. And I said, look, take the word math out of it. And don't you see this in your science classrooms? And they said, oh, yeah, we do. It's just a matter of talking to people and letting them understand the why, not just saying that's just the way it is, in my opinion. So I was going to have some discussion, but we're just frankly not going to have time for it because I want to get to the good news part that I think will make you happy that you came to the session today. So, what do I have for you to help you in your districts, in your schools? First, I should have updated it. This is on the website. It's not released later, it's there now. It is the instructional guidance for transition to the new B.E.S.T standards for mathematics. Lots of stuff moved between grade levels. We have a resource that tells your teachers exactly what moved. So like for instance, we're finishing up long division in grade 5 in these standards. Currently in our classrooms, that's being finished up in grade 6. All of the operations stuff is finished up in grade 5. Teachers need to know that so that they can plan in this upcoming year to know that, okay, I'm a 6th grade teacher. I'm not going to be teaching long division anymore. It's going to be in 5th grade. So how do I need to plan for that so we don't have a gap there in the students' learning? Symmetry went from grade 4 to grade 2 because it worked better there. Things like that are in this. You don't have to go and dive into it. You can use this resource. What happened was districts started calling us and saying for the instructional materials adoption, they needed help. We had this in the timeline to do in the fall, and I just said, we got to do it now. So we put a team of people together and we got it done. We brought them to Tallahassee, we took them to Gainesville, we met them there, we finished it, we formatted it, we routed it, we got it approved. It's on the website. So you don't have to do that. So this is what I'm telling you about that you're going to like way better than the test item specifications, and it's the instructional guide. Currently, we have K1 and 2 up on our website. Yesterday, grade 3 was fully approved, and I sent it to be ADA'd. Once it's ADA compliant, grade 3 will be up. Talked to the deputy chancellor this morning. He was signing off on grade 4. They're going through a pipeline at the department to be formatted and approved. Every single grade has an instructional guide. Within that instructional guide, there are connections already made for your teachers, with the understanding that these are possible connections. Like I told you about my students in biology that love genetics. There are going to be other connections that can be made. Now, this is the first iteration. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue to grow it. It's been written by math educators and leaders from around the state of Florida. It has in there vertical alignment, horizontal alignment. We really focused on horizontal alignment, which is, within the same grade level when we were writing the benchmarks. Common misconceptions, instructional tasks, instructional strategies. It's a one-stop shop. When you see it, you're going to say, wow, who would ever need to look at the test item specs again? The test item specifications are meant for item writers. I completely understand why math teachers have used those because they didn't have this. They don't have to use those anymore. We're not going to be plastering them up on the DOE website and saying, hey, everybody use this. They had to write the specifications with us. We, our team, worked with them on that. Yes. They are doing something different in ELA. They are using their, currently working on a benchmark mapping tool that will be released soon, and a book list resource that will have instructional tasks that are tied to the actual books on the book list. So there are products coming for them as well. They're in that whole formatting stage now. The benchmark mapping tool was written with the literacy directors around the state. It just takes time to get things professionally formatted and approved through the department. So I would recommend that you stay very engaged with the DOE website. I know in the past, maybe we haven't had a lot of stuff there, but we are really focused on making sure we have a strong presence for ELA and math and science and social studies on our website. So you guys, with the new civics benchmarks, that's the place to tune in for news. So as those are released, they will be disseminating that information, but sometimes information doesn't get to everybody. So I would say that on a regular basis to check that. So I'm happy to say we're having a district lead statewide math PD this July, and every single district, lab school, everyone is represented at that PD. So I can tell you somebody from your district is going, and I would get to know them. They're coming to be your district's implementation team for math. Now, what's going to happen after they come in July? Again, remember I told you the one and done, that doesn't work. So in July, they're going to come, it's like a train the trainer model. But train the trainer is copyrighted, so we can't say that. So we say district lead professional development. But when I say train the trainer, that makes more sense to everybody because we know what that is. So when they come this July, we've already got the dates set. They're going to get them in July. All throughout the 21-22 school year, they will have a monthly meeting to help them, to support them as they're going through in training. And then in the summer of 22, we will have another statewide professional development. That round will be for teachers. This is where they're going. Again, I know for a fact you have a team going. So it would behoove you to find out who they are. And if you had a team go to the regional literacy training in the spring, you have an ELA team too. Somewhere in your district, you have an ELA and a math team. And they are going to be at the math PD, just like in the ELA PD. They are determining who is not there with them that should have been there with them, right? They're saying, oh, this person, this coach should have been here. Who's going to be our champion? Maybe your superintendent, maybe, a deputy superintendent. They're going to be identifying those people. They are going to be needing you. And by the way, there's a leadership track this summer. So school administrators are coming as part of that team. So you need to figure out who's going to the leadership track, because we want you to learn what good looks like in a new B.E.S.T math classroom. We have a look for tool for you. We have been very busy. But if that information doesn't get to you, that's a problem, right? So go back and engage and say, like, for instance, we have some districts that are sending teams of like 40 people. I'm pretty sure Miami-Dade's team is 40. So they have not only a representative in each of the tracks, they've got multiple representatives, and they're going to have district planning time in July about what they're going to do when they get home. So again, questions for your consideration. Do you know who's going? Do you know who's going to the Summer Literacy Institute? And we want to empower these folks to feel like they can go and bring back this information, and they're going to have support in the schools to get this PD out to the teachers, because that's what they're going to be tasked with when they come back to school in the fall, is to come back into the school district and figure out how they're going to disseminate what they've learned to all of your teachers. So they're going to need your support. Yes, ma'am. Next week, June 29th through July 1st. It's in Orlando. But it's on the website too. It's on our DOE website. If you go to Just Read Florida on DOE, there's information on there. And again, just asking, how can you engage with your team to make sure that they're set up for success when they come back? How are they going to deliver this? Are they going to deliver it in after school? Are you going to do PLCs? Are you going to do, do you have early release days that you're going to work with? Because they're going to need time and support. They're coming away with a whole training kit. So they're going to have inside of that, they're going to have all the manipulatives. And hey, if I can just get this across today, I'd be so happy. Manipulatives are not just for elementary school anymore. They are for K-12. For some reason, we just sort of set those aside after elementary, maybe middle grades. 9-12 needs them too. So again, we're going to have these monthly meetings. The instructional guide will continue to grow. So we're going to revise, change, add tasks as we go. If you have any questions, hey, I ended right on time. If you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to anybody on my team. I'm PJ, but my real name's Patricia. So, and in Georgia, it's Patty Joe. So, that's real. My kids used to, when we would go home to Georgia, when we get to the state line, I'd say, oh, wait, y'all, did you feel it? My name just changed. Yes, ma'am. So if you go to, if the transition resource, if you're clicking on that link, that's K-12. The little box. Okay, so you can see that the elementary teachers decided they didn't want the little box. They wanted it in the other format. So we have the little boxes that kind of give you a high-level overview. The elementary folks wanted to do it more. They've got it by the benchmark, and it's bulleted. But I can show, we can look at it on my laptop too. That's the progression document. So there's a progression document on the website too. If you go to our website, let me just see if I can do it up here. Well, I don't know. I don't think I could get Wi-Fi. So if you go to our DOE website, okay. So if you scroll down just a little bit on the B.E.S.T standards page, the instructional guidance for transition to the new B.E.S.T standards for mathematics, there you go. And so the K-5 and the 6-12 are set up a little different, and that was because our teacher experts said that that would be the way that they would want it in K-5 and 6-12. So there is a noticeable difference, but that was based on they wrote it, and they felt like that was a better way to approach it. So that's the reason for the difference. We always listen to them, and they said, no, we really feel strongly about this, so that's what we did. But it's on the page, and on the links at the bottom where you're going to be able to get to the guide, it's the first link. It says transition in it, but we wanted it just to say transition resource, but at the department, we got to have lots of words, so we changed it. And I thank you for today. If you have any more questions, you can certainly come up here and ask me, but thank you for your time.